Frankie and the Thompson Traveling Circus. Story by Cameron Lewis. Acknowledgements. Without the collaborative effort of the following people, this book would have never come to fruition. Many thanks go to Nancy Becks for her review and input, and my friend Joanne Pills of the Southwest University of Visual Arts for her highly successful efforts in assembling and being a part of my team. Team members include my friend and illustrator, Travis Shetter, along with my friend and designer, Cheryl Carrington. This book is dedicated to my cherubs, my children, Seth and Rachel. Thank you for inspiring me to tell you dinnertime stories, for listening with such interest and challenging me with such thoughtful questions. I love you with all my heart, and never forget, all things are possible. In a very, very small town, smack dab in the middle of nowhere, waited daddies, mommies, sons, and daughters, and a little boy named Frankie. Waiting for what, you ask? The circus. The Thompson Traveling Circus. It came to town only once a year and performed a big tent show for 2 whole days. The hint of its arrival was in the air, and it was due to show up any day, or actually, any night now. Every year the circus would arrive just as the sun was setting and the town was preparing to settle in for the night. Frankie and his family finished their dinner, drank their warm milk, read a story, said their prayers, brushed their teeth, and had all just climbed into bed for a good night's rest. Frankie snuggled up in his bed in the peaceful darkness of his room, and his sleepy eyes began to close. Just as he was about to drift off to sleep, his eyes popped open and his head lifted off his pillow. What was that sound? Frankie wondered. Could it be the sound of the Thompson Traveling Circus coming? He cocked his head slightly and squinted his eyes, trying as hard as he could to catch the sound again. At that moment, he heard the low rumble that always came from under the hooves of the horses and the wheels of the wagons that brought the Thompson Traveling Circus to town. And yes, Frankie yelled to himself, it was on its way. In the dark distance came the high-pitched trumpeting sound blown by that magical little monkey who always rode on top of the crates carried by the first wagon. All of the sounds were announcing only one thing. The traveling circus was arriving. Frankie kicked off his covers and jumped from his bed. Climbing onto his step stool in front of his bedroom window, he peered out into the darkness and the direction of the only road, a dirt road that led into and out of his little town. He could just make out the glow from the lanterns that hung from the wagons as they came over the last hill into town. Frankie could see the dust cloud that rose from the horses and the wagons as they neared in the dimmed lantern light. But nothing could dim Frankie's excitement. His heart pounded as he tore himself from the window and tumbled back into bed to await the first of the 2 mornings the circus would be in town. Somehow, as excited as he was, Frankie had managed to fall asleep. He awoke to the early morning sun peeking into his bedroom window, and he wondered if the arrival of the circus had just been a dream. He yawned, rubbed the sleep from his eyes, jumped from his bed, and ran downstairs to greet the day. In the kitchen he found his father reading the morning paper, and his mother, who was just finishing cooking breakfast and setting the table. From her high chair, his baby sister gave him a 4-toothed grin. "Good morning, Frankie," chimed his mom. "You sure slept in this morning," added his father, "being the first day of the circus." "Yeah, well, I was up kind of late last night," replied Frankie. "Ah, you must have heard the circus come into town," said his mother. Frankie just grinned. "Well, let's feed our furnaces so we can get out there and have a look, everybody," said Frankie's father. And with that, they all sat down for breakfast. Once the table was cleared, teeth were brushed, and all were dressed, they ventured out into the warm morning sun and up the street. From only a few blocks away, they could hear the hypnotizing sound of the circus's pipe organ and a blaring voice through a speaker saying, "Come one, come all, come now. Come see the Thompson Traveling Circus. We have lions, we have tigers, and we have elephants. See the monkey and the bear." At that moment, Frankie and his family rounded the corner and could see the long red flag that topped the huge circus tent. Frankie could hardly wait to enter. He couldn't understand how in the world his dad and mom could be commenting on how nice the Folsons' lawn looked, or how his baby sister was more interested in sucking on his father's shirt collar than entering the wondrous tent. At long last, they got in the line to pay for the tickets that would allow them to witness sights only brought to town once a year. The familiar smell of fresh corn dogs, cotton candy, and the grease used to lubricate the rides was filling the air. One by one, closer and closer, they got to the ticket stand, where a tiny little man in a checkered jacket, only as big as Frankie, sat on a high stool selling tickets for the circus. There on his shoulder sat the magical little monkey, curiously peering at each customer as they entered. Once past the odd little man, and with tickets in hand, Frankie pleaded, "Please, Mom, please, Dad, can I ride the Ferris wheel first? Can I?" "Yes, Frankie," they replied in unison, knowing just why. Frankie loved to ride the Ferris wheel first of all, so he could get a bird's-eye view of the whole circus from one end to the other. By the end of the day, Frankie was exhausted and had still not seen all there was to see. But he knew there was still tomorrow, the last day of the Thompson Traveling Circus. Frankie spent most of the next day taking in the rest of the circus sights. He rode the rides, drank the fresh squeezed lemonade, and watched the animals do their stunning tricks. He was astounded by the magician and laughed until his side hurt as the clowns performed their silly stunts. It was then and there that Frankie knew that there was nothing more in the world he wanted than to join the Thompson Traveling Circus. Near the end of the last day, as the sun began to set, Frankie spotted the ringmaster and circus owner, Mr. Thompson. Nervously, Frankie coughed into his shoulder to clear his throat as he approached the tall, tuxedoed man. Mr. Thompson, sir?" Frankie said.
"Why, yes, young man. What can I do for you?"
replied the ringmaster. "Well, I was wondering if—" Frankie paused.
"Yes? Go on, young man."
"Well, if I could join the circus and continue on with you to the next town?" Frankie squeaked.
"What? You join the Thompson Traveling Circus?"
roared the ringmaster. "Yes, sir," Frankie replied meekly. The ringmaster wrapped his left arm around his protruding belly and brought his right index finger up to his right cheek.
You want to join the Thompson Traveling Circus, eh?"
repeated Mr. Thompson.
"You seem awfully young."
"Yes, sir. I promise to work very hard and do anything that needs to be done," Frankie said with excitement. "And I look a lot younger than I really am." Tapping his finger on his cheek, the ringmaster said,
"As a matter of fact, there just might be some things you could be helpful with. Pack a bag of things you'll need, clothes, a toothbrush, and some soap. Come back in an hour, and you can begin by helping to disassemble the tent."
Frankie answered, "Yes, sir," and off he ran. Within an hour, Frankie returned and began working up a storm. He helped the circus crew to unbolt poles, fold tarps, and load the wagons. When it was all packed and ready to roll, he jumped on the wagon and got to ride next to the magical little monkey, who began blowing the tiny trumpet, just as Frankie had heard him do so many times before. The caravan began making its way down the dirt road that led out of town and towards its next stop. Looking back, Frankie saw his little town getting smaller and smaller as they rode further and further away. The sun had set, and the lanterns on the wagons were lit to help find the path, just as Frankie had seen them do every year. Frankie eventually fell asleep in the back of the wagon. When he awoke the next morning, he found himself in a place he had never imagined being. A place where the buildings seemed so tall they touched the sky. The road was no longer dirt, but black and hard. There were electric signs with everything from the names of restaurants on them to the names of hotels and things people wanted to sell. There were cars and trucks beeping and honking and buzzing by as the circus caravan made its way to a large field in the middle of it all. Frankie found himself excited and a bit frightened at the same time. The wagons pulled to a stop, and the crew began setting up the circus for the next show. Frankie joined in and worked right along with the rest of the people. It was a very long day, and the more tired Frankie became, the more he began to miss his dad, mom, and baby sister. Nighttime finally fell, and Frankie now wanted nothing more in the whole world than to be with his family eating dinner, having his warm milk, reading a story, brushing his teeth, and climbing into his very own bed. Mr. Thompson saw Frankie standing alone, staring sadly into the sky. Frankie was noticing that he couldn't even see any stars because the city lights were so bright. He even missed seeing those stars too.
"So, Frankie, quite a day, eh?"
asked Mr. Thompson. "Yes, sir, quite a day," answered Frankie.
"You look a little lonesome there, young man," said Mr. Thompson.
"Well, sir, actually I am. I love the circus so very much, but I really miss my family," responded Frankie.
"Want to go home, little fellow?" asked the ringmaster.
Frankie said, "Yes, sir, I'm sure my family misses me too."
The ringmaster knelt down with a grunt and whispered to Frankie,
"I think if you walk around the last wagon on the right, you'll find some people who would like to get you home in time for dinner."
He handed Frankie the money he had earned, looked him in the eyes, shook his hand, and said,
"You did a fine job, young man. See you next year."
Frankie accepted the ringmaster's compliment and said,
"Thank you, Mr. Thompson, thank you very much."
Frankie walked around the last wagon on the right, and there he found his mom, dad, and baby sister, all with their arms open and ready to take him home. He ran into their arms and with a kiss on each of their cheeks said, "I don't think I'm cut out to be with the circus, but I sure will look forward to being at the circus next year. And hey," he added, "baby sister has 2 more teeth." The end. Produced at Earache Studios. Read by Eric Holland.